Yeah. So a couple times you've mentioned liberals, and one of the things that I talk about on my show often, because I was a progressive, I was a lefty. I now call myself a classical liberal, and I've tried to make the point that being a liberal in the traditional sense has very little, if anything, to do with the left anymore.
Yes,
Are
that's
there
true.
any? Do you see any sort of meaningful distinction between classical liberal and libertarian at this point, or do you see even? I'll ask you a couple things at once, and you can go any direction. Do you see any? Do you see a difference, of course, between liberals and the left? I mean, the words have all sort of gotten
Milton
muddled,
Friedman
right?
used to always say that he was a liberal. So did Hayek. And of course, in different countries, the word means different things. I mean, Australia, if you said you were a liberal, they would understand what you were saying. But a liberal in Australia is different from a liberal in the United States.
Yeah. So when you say liberal, you mean leftist, basically.
Yeah,
right?
and the American sense of the word.
Yeah. Do you think there's any sort of real distinction that needs to be made between classical liberal and libertarian? That's one of the things that people ask me all the time. And I know you're not big on labels generally, but I did read something where you said that the closest thing that you could be labeled as is libertarian. Is that still where you're at?
Yeah, except of course in foreign policy.
We can talk about that too.
And I mean, I guess also the libertarians seem to have this atomistic view of the world, which I think is completely unrealistic.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Because I mean, not only in my life, but in the lives of people around me, the surroundings make a huge difference. One of the things I get into a lot in the book is the disparities imply either discrimination on the one hand or genetic differences on the other. And disparities are the norm. I mean, I was just reading something the other day, that Latin America has 8% of the people in the world. They commit 38% of all the murders. And in Latin America, 38% for that. But in Latin America, 80% of the murders occur on 2% of the streets.
Wow.
So, but you find that when you look up facts, that's what you find over and over again. In all the discussions of income differences, they never take into account age, and age is huge. I mean, Japanese Americans have a median age of 50. Hispanic Americans have a median age of 26. Now, when you see Hispanic Americans greatly overrepresented among baseball stars, and not a single Japanese American baseball star in the major leagues, I don't believe in entire history.
Yeah. Well, we had Ichiro on Seattle.
No. There are people of Japanese ancestry who've become baseball stars.
Yeah.
All of them are from Japan. None of them are Japanese American.
Ah, okay, fair enough. Right, he was a star in Japan for many years.
That's right.
Yeah.
So how many 50-year-old men are going to be baseball stars?
Yeah.
And by the same token, how
Not
many
many.
26-year-old men are going to be surgeons or CEOs? Any other kind of job that requires long years of study or long years of experience. And so even if they were the same, if the two groups were the same in every other way, and if there was absolutely no distinction or discrimination or whatnot, they still would be a huge difference in income simply because of age.
And that really is what this book is about. And the book itself, it's about 160 pages. But what I loved, you know how many pages of notes you have in there? Do you know offhand by any
Well,
chance?
I know 127 pages are text, and the rest of it is notes.
Yeah, so you had about 30 some odd pages on
Yeah.
notes, and I actually started going through the notes because I thought this is exactly what we need now. Like when I was reading it, there were pages that I had to read more than once because you're obviously giving a lot of numbers and facts, and you have to look at these things from different angles, and we're not very good at that these days, right? We're sort of look at things from one angle, and then you start the screaming. And I think that's what you're really a master of here.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I try to, but we'll see how it works out.
We'll see. Do you make any meaningful distinction between sort of a classical liberal and a libertarian? Is that just sort of?
That's wholly peripheral, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, just trying to get a few simple facts across is a full-time job.
Yeah. All right. So then let's talk about some of the facts that you lay out in the book. You talk about two types of discrimination. Could you lay those out?
Yeah. The word has almost opposite meanings. I mean, the first meaning, when they say someone has discriminating taste, you mean he can tell what is a good wine from a bad wine, what is a good camera from a bad camera, and so forth. And that's almost the exact opposite of the meaning in the law, where you mean someone who judges someone by what group he comes from, irrespective of the individual's actual personal qualities. So those are two very different things. Ideally, you would like every person to be judged as an individual. But as a practical matter, that becomes impossible because the costs are prohibitive.
Yeah. So
I use the example where if you're walking down the street at night and you see a shadowy figure in an alley up ahead, I mean, do you judge him as an individual or do you cross the street and go across on the other side? Because the cost of judging him as an individual can be very high, including your life. So we make that distinction. But then I say I call that discrimination. Discrimination one is when you just have a very good understanding of what the facts are. And so if you judge each person as an individual, I call that discrimination 1A. Mm-hmm. And then if you judge them by the group they belong to, that's not as good, but that's discrimination 1B, but it's still based on some facts. Discrimination 2, which is what reason we have anti-discrimination laws, is that you don't worry about that at all. If he's someone that you don't like for whatever reason, then you biased against him.
Yeah. Are you shocked when you look at what's going on right now and see so much talk about race all the time, so much talk about all of the things that separate us, the very things that you've been arguing against based in fact for so many years that seem in an odd way more, I don't think there's more racism now than ever or more of these dividers, but there's more talk about it.
Yes. And it's devastating. I mean, wars in general are much easier to start than they are to stop. I mean, when that fellow in Serbia shot the Archduke, I mean, who knew that was going to cause millions of people around the world, including people from the United States about 10,000 miles away, are going to come over there and start shooting.
Yeah, the Great War.
Yeah, and you can't get and I'm worried about the current trade war. You start a trade war, you may never be able to stop it in the next decade. Because there are too many people involved, too many cross currents of interest and so on.
What would you do about our school systems?
Oh my goodness, I'll try to be rational.
Do try.
They are so awful. The public has no idea what. I'm reading a book about the schools, and the woman who's writing it, Diane Ravitch, is talking about how teachers have due process before they can be fired. Now, when you look into the facts of it, right down here in, I think it was Atherton, it cost $500,000 to fire one incompetent teacher. You don't have a big enough budget, And
right.
in New York, you have something called the rubber room. These are teachers who are so incompetent that the principals don't want them in the classroom. And they get paid full salary, and they show up, and they accrue pension rights and so forth. And the last time, I forget how many millions of dollars are spent a year in New York paying for teachers who don't teach, and in fact don't do anything but show up at the same time as if they were teaching, and they read magazines or whatever they feel like doing. And this farce goes on at a time when they don't have enough money to provide the kids with decent supplies.
So how do we scale back this? I mean, we can talk about it through the lens of education, but in any area where the government has taken on a bigger role than it's supposed to, I think one of the things you hear all the time is it's sort of too late. I think a lot of people think it's too late to take back that government power.
No, heavens, during the Reagan administration, that was the only time I know of when the Federal Register grew smaller, where they compile all the laws that have been passed in a given time. So it can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done. Someone once, there was some issue that Reagan was discussing, and someone said, it's complicated. He said, it's not complicated. It's just not easy to do. I mean, right now, one of the big farces out here talks about affordable housing. And they're appointing blue ribbon committees to look into why there's no affordable housing. And I think that's like appointing a blue ribbon committee to explain why the ground is wet after a rain. I mean, it's very simple. If you prevent people from building housing and the population is growing, you're going to have a housing shortage,
Yeah.
and you won't have affordable housing. It's really, economics 1 during the first 2 weeks.
They're not very good at taking economics 101, I don't think. So would your answer be in almost every case to just scale back government, scale back regulation?
No, it depends on what they're doing. There are some things that government is necessary to do.
So what are those type of things that you?
For security, first of all, having dependable laws. Some people think that if you're for free markets, that means you don't think the government should do anything. No. The free markets don't operate except within a framework of laws. That's wholly different from having them operate with politicians jumping in at unpredictable times to suddenly pass some new legislation.
Yeah. What can we do right now? I mean, so really this would be about just sort of electing more libertarian-minded politicians then? I mean, is that really the only way we can change things, do you think?
No, I think the main thing, people have to know what the facts are themselves. If everyone knew what all the facts were, I think you'd have an entirely different set of people elected. I can't believe that either of the presidential candidates in 2016 would have been the candidates if you had an informed public.
Yeah, we're not very good at that. How much of this do you think is part of the media's fault? That's one of the things.
Well, the media are mostly uninformed. No, they're not uninformed. They are misinformed. Mm-hmm. And they simply do not check the facts on large issues or small.
Yeah. What can we do to fix that, do you think? I mean, I suppose this,
No,
right?
no,
right?
no,
Like
yeah.
writing books like this. and
Well, but I
having
think
long form.
more fundamentally, the public that votes has to itself become informed and not be so easily stampeded by slogans and a few numbers thrown around, like, women make X% of what men make, and so on.
Yeah.
When I was studying that some years ago, for example, I found out that young female doctors made much less money than young male doctors. And that seemed like very odd. And but when you look into it, you discover that young male doctors work an average of 500 hours a year more than young female doctors, and they get paid for the 500 hours. Mm-hmm. But there's no reason why the women and men should be doing the same thing. Their circumstances are different.
So are there any laws that are in place right now that you believe are discriminatory one way or another towards any community or against any community?
Oh, I would have to write a much larger book to cover them all. The minimum wage law is absolutely devastating. The policy of saying that you cannot have more kids from one ethnic group disciplined in the school than from another is nonsense. I mean, groups are different from each other in umpteen ways, and to have the presumption that they are the same except for the way they're treated is nonsense. It's never been true, and I don't know why we would think it's true here today.
So I do sense that some of what you just said there is bubbling up into the national conscious, because I get a ton of email from black conservatives now, mm-hmm. people that feel that they haven't been represented fairly, or that the so-called leaders of the black community that are on television all the time are actually preaching the complete reverse of everything that you've said here.
Yes.
Do you sense that there is some sort of growing conservative movement
within
the black community?
There was a time when that community consisted of me and Walter Williams. I know Walter used to say the two of us should never fly on the same plane, otherwise the whole movement will disappear if the plane goes down.
I mentioned to you before we started that Larry Elder caused my awakening because I was a progressive and I said something to him about systemic racism on air, and he beat me senseless with facts, and I had to go back and reassess what was wrong with my thinking.
Well, in one of the chapters there, I have a little section about the era of apartheid in South Africa. And I had that in there because there's so much argument about how much racism is there and so forth. And I said, let's test this hypothesis in a setting where there's absolutely no doubt of it. And that's apartheid in South Africa, with a government where blacks are not allowed to vote and so forth, and you then apply the economic principles, and you find that the economic principles apply in South Africa, that there are some occupations. See, blacks weren't allowed by law to be in certain occupations more than a certain percentage, and in some occupations couldn't be hired at all. In some of those occupations where they couldn't be hired at all, well, illegal to hire them at all, there were more blacks hired than there were whites, because there are economic factors that come in, and you don't just pass a law and that automatically produces the results you want.
Yeah. Can you go into some of the economic factors that you mentioned there? Because I thought it was sort of interesting about the types of jobs that black people had and why that would affect.
Well, it's the competitiveness of the industry. In a competitive industry, discrimination in the sense that we use for anti-discrimination laws, it costs the discriminator as well as the others. Now, insofar as that price can be evaded by the discriminator, he will discriminate. For example, minimum wage laws. When you have a minimum wage law, you have more people applying for jobs in those categories than there are jobs available, because raising the wage rate causes more people to apply and employers to hire fewer because they're more expensive. And so you have a chronic surplus. Now, if you've got a chronic surplus in an industry, it costs nothing to discriminate. But if you have a competitive market, then of course it does cost something. For every person that you discriminate against who's qualified, you've got to hire somebody else, and you've got to raise that pay rate in order to get people in. So I show how competitive industries have much less discrimination than, say, regulated public utilities.
So I was wondering when I was reading it if you were ever going to talk about how now technology is also changing this. So we see a lot of these movements for $15 minimum wage, and I know why you don't think that's a great idea. But even now where we see McDonald's and some of these other places just replacing people with iPads and computers.
This has been happening. I don't know. When I grew up in Harlem, when you went into a movie theater, this is a little neighborhood movie theater in Harlem, there would be a kid who would walk down the aisle with you with a flashlight to show you to your seat, you see. And so now that we have so many compassionate people who want people to be paid a living wage, you stumble down the aisle to your seat the best way you can, because they're not going to pay you that kind of money, that's unrelated to productivity.
Yeah. What would you say to the people? I hear a growing movement of people saying, well, this is why we need a universal basic income, because technology is going to force so many people out of the workplace.
Oh, that argument has been made for centuries, and it's been proven wrong for centuries. I would ask the question, what has happened? We've moved in that direction already. We have lots of people who can live off the welfare state and not have to be productive. And how are they better people as a result of that? I saw some time back, and I haven't followed this, that young people, the suicide rates among young people were among the negative consequences of the 1960s. You've taken all meaning out of people's lives. And so they find all kinds of crazy things to do, drugs, whatever. And then, again, it's not peculiar to the United States. You find this in Britain, other countries. And so, again, people who say this almost never look at any facts about what's happened as we expanded the welfare state. Did people behave better? No. I mean, when